Hi friends, thank you for taking time out of your week to spend a little with me. I appreciate you. This week I decided after receiving many requests to cover this case that I should just go ahead and cover it. So I ask you all to join me as we remember Dr. Charles Scudder and Joseph Odom. Dr. Charles Lee Scudder was born on October 6, 1926 in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, to his parents Charles and Eleanor. By 1940, Charles enrolled in Oberlin College, where he was part of the drama program. Charles took an interest in the art of acting, where he landed lead roles specifically in the 1945 production of Candida. During his time at Oberlin, he met Helen Hayslett. The two had classes together, and they quickly fell in love. The couple married on September 10, 1946, but it was short-lived, with the two divorcing shortly after that. By 1950, he'd already studied zoology and languages as an undergraduate. He attended Loyola University, where he would earn his PhD in pharmacology. He also met his second wife, Bortai Bunting. Together they had 4 sons, Saul in 1950, Gideon in 1951, Fenris in 1952, and Ahab in 1953. After the birth of their 4th son, the couple separated. After completing his doctorate, Charles was offered the position of Associate Director for Loyola University of Chicago's Institute for Mind, Drugs, and Behavior. He also worked as an associate professor. Charles's mentor and coworker, Alexander Karsmar, regarded him as brilliant, soft-spoken, and confident, but a bit eccentric. Charles dyed his hair purple and kept a pet monkey. He was an accomplished harp player and was invited to play in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He lived in an old mansion in Chicago that he filled with Baroque furniture he purchased during a liquidation sale from local theaters. His work at the college was not typical academics. He performed government-funded experiments with mind-altering drugs like LSD. It was just Charles, his sons, and his longtime housekeeper and friend Joseph Odom. Joseph, who was known as Joey, was born on March 27, 1938 in Chicago, Illinois to parents Conrad and Mary. He was one of 4 children, being the only son. He stopped attending school in the 5th grade and had trouble with the law. Joey was known for his culinary abilities. Charles once wrote of Joey stating, "He'd learned far more about the world than I had, with all of my degrees. And somewhere along the line, he developed a talent for whipping up meals fit for a king." Joey was hired by Charles in 1959 to help with his sons and the house after his second divorce. Joseph always strived for a simpler life, and Charles would make that dream a reality. For more than a decade, Charles taught students and maintained a fierce regimen of research. But after years of unteachable students and unbearable colleagues, he decided to call it quits. According to Charles, Chicago was changing, and he didn't want to be a part of it. He wanted to be somewhere where bills were a thing of the past, and the two could live in peace. The pair started searching for a new place to call home. Charles wanted someplace in the hilly country that offered all 4 seasons, but not harsh winters. He searched the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in North Georgia, where he was enamored by the wildlife. He eventually found the place he wanted to call home. So, on December 17, 1975, after searching for months, Charles purchased the southeast quarter of Lot 248, 6th Land District of Chattooga County, Georgia, for $10,500. The property amassed 40 acres in total. On his 50th birthday in 1976, Charles officially resigned from his position at the university. They sold off a majority of their possessions, and weeks later sold the mansion. By January of 1977, he loaded Joseph and their 2 bull mastiffs, Beelzebub, named after a demon, and Arseniath, named after an H.P. Lovecraft character, and headed for Georgia. Unfortunately for Charles and Joseph, they arrived during a blizzard, so the first few nights were spent sleeping in the car. Eventually, the snow started to melt, and they were able to get to work. The men cleared the plot of land, dug a well, and even excavated the foundation by hand. By summer, the first floor of the brick castle-like structure was livable. The structure was eventually dubbed Corpsewood Manor, due to the way the trees looked upon their arrival. Corpsewood Manor sat on top of a mountain, which could only be reached by a winding road they named Dead Horse Road. Corpsewood was of Charles' design. It was made with medieval building techniques. Leading into the main entrance was an arch guarded by a pink concrete gargoyle. The castle had an upstairs bedroom that was only reached by a circular staircase, illuminated by stained glass. The stained glass was described as macabre. One depicted a human skull, and another featured Baphomet, the demonic goat-headed deity that serves as the official symbol of the Church of Satan. Outside of the manor was a wooden sign that greeted visitors stating, "Beware of the Thing." Corpsewood took 2 years to build and was described as an elegant mini-castle. Shortly after the move to Georgia, Joseph was involved in a serious car accident in 1977. This accident left him in an invalid state for months. He never regained his full health, but Joseph didn't let it stop him, continuing to play host alongside Charles when they had visitors at the manor. Although Joseph was described as a Catholic by friends, Charles was said to be a registered member of the Church of Satan in 1980. In 1966, the Church of Satan was founded by Anton LaVey, the author of the Satanic Bible in San Francisco. It had a small but dedicated following. According to the Church of Satan, they do not believe in an actual spiritual entity named Satan or any other supernatural beings. Rather, they use the Christian notion of Satan to rally around atheistic, hedonistic ideals. Charles never spoke publicly about his affiliation with the Church of Satan, and often claimed his beliefs aligned more with atheism. But his life was filled with the symbology of the religion. Besides the artwork within the manor, Charles drove a black Jeep with a pentagram painted on the side. When the pair would drive into Tryon for supplies, they quickly gained a reputation as the gay devil worshippers. Joseph and Charles dressed like hippies and kept to themselves. Their need for privacy only made the locals more curious about what was going on at Corpsewood Manor. Rumors flooded that Charles had summoned demons to guard their property, while others claimed to have seen robed figures holding seances in the woods by the manor. But those who knew the pair reported them to not only be kind, but great hosts. Corpsewood became known for its social gatherings. Joseph made delicious 5-course candlelit meals with their homemade wine, and Charles would play his harp as the entertainment. The parties were exquisite and offered an after-party excursion, if that was what you were into. On the property also sat wooden structures. One specifically was called the Chicken House. It was 3 stories tall. The first floor housed their chickens and food, but the third floor was the rumored Pink Room. The Pink Room was only accessible by a ladder leading up to a narrow wooden opening. It was a single pink room and sparsely furnished, just a few lamps, mattresses, and a considerable amount of adult material. The Pink Room was described as their pleasure chamber, and many of their social gatherings culminated there. Participants reported that encounters were consensual and free of judgment. Charles kept a journal for guests to record their experiences and preferences if they wanted. The stories of the Pink Room only sparked more gossip from the conservative community of Tryon, but it didn't stop people from going to Corpsewood. In 1982, Kenneth Brock, an avid hunter from Walker County, asked Charles if he could hunt on his land, and Charles agreed. Over time, the 17-year-old became friends with the 2 men. Kenneth lived a hard life. His father kicked him out when he was very young, and he lived with an older man, Samuel West, who went by Tony. Tony, much like Kenneth, had a troubled past. Throughout his teens and 20s, he was in and out of jails and mental institutions. After several visits with Charles and Joey, Kenneth decided to tell Tony about the men on the mountain. He explained to Tony that Charles and Joey were wealthy. He believed the couple were hiding their riches in the manor, and knew if he and Tony could pull off a heist, they would be set for the rest of their lives. So within the confines of their home, Kenneth and Tony devised a plan. On December 12, 1982, Kenneth was invited to Corpsewood for a get-together, and he agreed but asked to bring along some guests. These guests included Tony, Tony's nephew Joey Wells, and Teresa Hutchins, Joey's girlfriend. Joey and Teresa were unaware of the plan. Before going to Corpsewood, Kenneth decided to stop at his mother's house and retrieve a .22 Remington rifle. On the way to Corpsewood, Kenneth produced Toodaloo, a mixture of varnish, paint thinner, alcohol, and glue, combined in a can for huffing. Shortly after their arrival, Charles invited the 4 of them up to the 3rd floor of the Chicken House into the Pink Room. Joey Odom stayed in the main house to clean up after dinner. Charles provided the wine, while Kenneth continued to pass around his Toodaloo. Charles did not partake. After some time, Kenneth claimed he needed to get more Toodaloo and left the Pink Room. He instead went into the vehicle and retrieved the rifle. Kenneth returned, and allegedly Charles chuckled and stated, "Bang bang." Joey Wells and Teresa attempted to leave, making it to Tony's car, but found it would not crank. Tony made them come back up where the scene unfolded. Kenneth lunged at Charles, grabbing him by his hair, and pressed a knife to his neck. He started interrogating him about his supposed hidden fortune. Unfortunately for Kenneth, Charles calmly explained he had no fortune. In reality, Charles put everything he had into Corpsewood Manor, and what little bit of money he did have was in a bank in town. Kenneth grew enraged and changed the plan. He left Charles under the command of Tony and went back to the main house to find Joseph. Joseph was still in the kitchen when Kenneth shot him 4 times. He then found their 2 dogs and shot them by the wood heater. Hearing the shots, Tony forced Charles and the 2 teens down the ladder and into the main house. Kenneth again demanded money, but Charles was overwhelmed by the sight of his longtime companion and pulled away. Charles went to Joseph's body where he uttered his last words, "I asked for this," before he was shot in the head by Tony. Charles dropped to his knees as another shot rang out, sending him into a nearby bookcase. He was then shot 3 more times in the head. Tony and Kenneth ransacked the house for valuables. They attempted to steal Charles's golden harp, but found it was too large for the vehicle, so it was left behind. The group then stole Charles's Jeep and fled the scene. 2 men threatened the teens as they drove back to their home. If either of them breathed a word of the murders, they would kill them too. Tony and Kenneth planned to flee to Mexico. They drove through the night, eventually stopping at a rest stop on I-20 outside of Vicksburg, Michigan. They planned to steal another car and found the perfect getaway vehicle. The vehicle belonged to Navy Lieutenant Kirby Phelps, who was traveling from Jacksonville, Florida to San Francisco, California. Kirby was planning a trip to stop by his mother's in Oklahoma City when he made the unfortunate company of Kenneth and Tony. At the time, Kirby was sleeping behind the wheel of a Toyota vehicle when he was forced out of his car. The deadly duo led Kirby to a grove of trees where they'd planned to tie him up and leave him. However, Kirby attempted to escape, so Tony shot him. He died at the scene. On December 16th, 2 days after the murders, Charles and Joseph were discovered. Their friend Raymond Williams went to Corpsewood. Raymond wanted to let them know that their mutual friend, Ray Hood from Rome, Georgia, passed away on the 14th. But when Raymond arrived, he noticed gunshots in the door. Rather than investigating, he retreated down the mountain and called the sheriff's office. The investigation was underway, and law enforcement were baffled by the sights of Corpse Manor. The walls were blood-stained, furniture overturned, and bullet casings littered about. Both the Georgia Bureau of Investigations and the State Crime Lab were called to the scene. Inside, they found 2 human skulls, vials of LSD, numerous occult tools, a small occult library, a large academic and literature library, and adult materials. It was later discovered the human skulls and LSD were taken from the university. Also found was a painting completed by Charles. It was a self-portrait. In the painting, Charles was gagged and dripping with blood from 5 bullet holes. It was painted just months before his murder. The contents of Corpsewood only solidified the town's opinion, and the newspapers labeled them as devil worshippers. According to Raymond Williams, they were not devil worshippers. Although Charles was a member, he wasn't a participant. He only joined to see what it was all about. Charles had been in contact with the founder of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey. Allegedly, after the news of the murders were made nationwide, and the men were being referred to only as the gay devil worshippers, Anton LaVey was enraged by the injustice of what happened to them. He viewed their deaths as evidence that there were still areas in the country where eccentrics were attacked for having beliefs outside of societal norms. On the day the bodies were discovered, Teresa came forward to the sheriff's department, pointing the finger at Tony West and Kenneth Brock. Warrants were issued later that day. Meanwhile, Kenneth and Tony made their way to Austin, Texas, but after a big argument about their plans, they decided to part ways. Kenneth hitchhiked home. His journey led him to Marietta, Georgia, where he decided to call his mom, who informed him about the warrant. Without options, Kenneth hung up the phone and walked into a gas station, where he told the attendant what he'd done. Moments later, police swarmed the station and Kenneth was taken into custody on December 20th. Tony made it to Missouri before deciding to turn back around and head east. He passed through Chattanooga, Tennessee before he ran out of gas. Much like Kenneth, Tony didn't have options. He was tired and broke, so he walked to a nearby highway lounge where he found an officer and confessed to his crimes. He was apprehended on Christmas Eve. On December 26th, the arrests were reported to the local news. By February of 1983, legal proceedings were underway. Kenneth admitted to murdering Joseph, and for his part, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. Tony was charged with murdering Charles, but pleaded not guilty. According to court documents, Tony claimed the murders were an act of revenge for the embarrassment suffered by Kenneth when he allowed Charles to perform sex acts on him during an earlier visit. Tony contended the crimes were the product of hallucinations from Charles spiking the homemade wine with LSD. He claimed Charles did this to convince them to have sex with him. Tony's attorney tried to use the defense of involuntary intoxication, stating the reason for this supposed drugging proved he had a motive since he was gay. A forensic analysis of the wine revealed no traces of LSD. The jury ignored Tony's attorney's prejudicial stance of reasoning against Charles and instead focused on not only the evidence, but to the fact that Tony confessed to a GBI agent that he and Kenneth planned the murders and robbery days before carrying out the plan. After several days of testimony, the jury found Tony guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to death. The following year, he appealed his original judgment because the jury was not equally balanced between women and men. On his second trial, he pleaded guilty and was also sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. Kenneth is currently serving his sentence at the Coffee Correctional Facility. He is 59 years old. Tony is currently serving his sentence at the Wilcox State Prison. He is 72. Both have been denied parole multiple times since their convictions. A small private funeral was held at Corpsewood for Charles and Joseph. Charles' ashes were taken to Wisconsin by his sister and buried in the family plot on April 25, 1983. Joseph's ashes were scattered in the rose garden at Corpsewood. In his will, Charles left everything to Joseph, not his family or children. On January 5, 1983, the chicken house caught on fire. It soon spread to the manor. Portions of the manor remain even today, where curious visitors claim the area is steeped in sadness. Allegedly, gunshots, dog barks, and glowing eyes can be seen in the dark. Hi friends, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I want to give a special thanks to everyone who reached out and asked me to cover this case. I appreciate you taking the time to send the suggestion. As always, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, so leave them below and we can chat about this case. If you found this to be informative, please consider giving the video a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more from me. And lastly, if you're not subscribed yet, you should, because we would love to have you under the ash tree. It is almost time for spooky season, so as always, I will be putting together my viewer submission video for Halloween. If you have any ghost stories, strange encounters, aliens, cryptids, or whatever you think that would make our hair stand on edge, I would love to hear them and share them with the community. Would you kindly submit them to either one of my socials through a private message or through my email? All links are in the description, and I thank you in advance. I hope you all have an amazing week ahead of you because you're the best and you deserve it. But for now, we must part ways. So stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, friends.